In the early 1990s, Croatia were one of a new band of nations admitted into international football after the dissolutions of multiple European republics. Whilst the rest of them stuttered and failed, Croatia prospered and became one of the great stories of the late 20th century. This is the story of the birth of Croatia, in a football sense, and the rise of the dark horses of international football, their great teams of 1996 and 98. Football came to Croatia specifically towards the back end of the First World War, but only officially in 1940, when they encountered the perennial neutrals of Switzerland. The nascent footballing outfit wouldn't be allowed to go out on their own. Croatia and Croatian football would be enveloped into Yugoslavia after the Second World War. Croatians would play international football at the highest level, only hidden from public view outside of their own borders under the guise of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia ought to have been world beaters, able to draw on players from Croatia, Serbia, Montenegro, Bosnia and Slovenia. For more on their history, stick around, there'll be more in this issue this week. Plug. It was an open secret that there was a quota that the selectors had to adhere to. Whilst Croatia would be allowed 5 players in each squad, Serbia would be given double that, and those from Montenegro, Bosnia and Slovenia peppered the remainder of the squad. In a 2012 interview with the Blizzard, former coach Ivica Osim all but confirmed this quota. Everything is politics, every club was politics, and especially the national team was politics. Before he would go on to compare how difficult it would be for an Englishman to pick a Team GB squad from all United Kingdom nations. That hypothetical manager would be tasked with keeping all the players and supporters happy, and that wouldn't even be with the impending threat of war or conflict as it constantly was in Yugoslavia. The Republic would be temporary, and the foundations were loosened by the seismic news that Yugoslavia's communist dictator Tito died in May 1980. It is said that when Yugoslavia buried Tito, they effectively buried Yugoslavia. Fast forward 11 years, Slovenia and Croatia had both declared themselves to be sovereign states and were all set to declare their independence. The new president of Serbia, Slobodan Milosevic, admitted Yugoslavia is finished. War was now inevitable, and the first casualties came in March of 1991. And yet, 2 months later, a Yugoslavian club became European champions via Red Star Belgrade, as their country imploded in the background. A month later, both Croatia and Slovenia officially declared its independence. Croatia fought for that independence in a bloody war until November 1995. Meanwhile, if we can circle things back to football, Croatian football was back. FIFA officially recognised the new state in July 1992, 2 months after the first former Yugoslav republics were ratified by the United Nations. UEFA alternatively were a little tardy on the matter, as they waited to accept Croatia until before the draw for Euro 96 qualifying in January 1994. Unfortunately, Croatia couldn't participate in FIFA's World Cup qualifying for the 1994 tournament, as they had missed the draw by 8 months, but would be in place to challenge for a spot in a competition from Euro 96 onwards. They could count on 4 players who represented Yugoslavia at the 1990 World Cup, in forwards Alan Boksic and Davor Suker, wing-back Robert Jani and midfield creator Robert Prozineski. In Zvonimir Boban, Croatia could also boast a Champions League winner. There was experience, there was quality, and in Miroslav Blažević, Croatia had their first permanent manager post-independence. Blažević had vast experience from either side of the white line, playing for Lokomotiva Zagreb, FK Sarajevo and Rijeka in Yugoslavia, before expanding to Switzerland, turning out for Sion. His coaching career began exactly there, with his early successes coming with a league title at Grasshopper Zurich and a cup with Sion. Back in Croatia, he was able to drag Dinamo Zagreb to their first Yugoslav championships in a generation in 1983, in what was the first of 4 stints with Croatia's primary team. He didn't get everything right though. He told everyone he could that he would eat his coaching degree certificate if a certain player made it as a professional. That player Robert Prosinecki, who had already won enough for one lifetime before Croatia was reformed. He was the only Croatian who lifted the European Cup in Red Star Belgrade's 1991 winning campaign. Prosinecki was going to represent his homeland of Croatia as soon as humanly possible. And with that, they were all set to enter the international stage. Group 4 of Euro 96 qualifying, had it been drawn for the prior championships, would have included one team, Italy. From the former Republic of Yugoslavia, Croatia were joined by Slovenia, whilst former Soviet states of Lithuania, Ukraine and Estonia were packed into a 6-team pool where 2 teams would qualify. It was an open book of a qualification group where the only thing that seemed obvious was that Italy would be able to hold their own as World Cup finalists. Miroslav Blažević deployed his nation in a back 3, which might come across as a bit retrograde in the mid-90s, but this form of the once popular system was used without a sweeper. More often than not, the flat back 3 was accompanied by 2 flying wing-backs in Robert Jani and Mario Stanic or Dario Simic. A midfield trio was led by the creative forces of Prosinecki and Boban, behind a glut of attacking options, the front of which were Davor Suker, Goran Vlahovic and Alan Boksic. It all began serenely. Davor Suker's double away in Estonia marked Croatia's first official competitive game with a win, before the same 2-0 scoreline was achieved in Zagreb against Lithuania. Closing out the momentous year known as 1994, Croatia travelled to Palermo, where another Davor Suker brace confirmed the biggest result in the country's short footballing history. Italy were beaten 2-1 and Croatia were all but home and hosed, barring any ridiculous result. It was clear that wasn't going to happen when Croatia began 1995 with a 4-0 drubbing of Ukraine in Zagreb. Goalless trips to Lithuania and Ukraine, returning home with just a point, only prolonged qualification, whilst a 7-1 battering of Estonia left Croatia on the brink of an historic qualification. All that was needed was 3 points from the visit of Italy to split. This time, Croatia didn't walk away with all 3 points. Davor Suker's converted penalty equalising Dimitrije Albertini's first half strike. They would only have to wait 3 days for that qualification to be sealed, thanks to a 90th minute Saša Udovic goal for neighbours Slovenia in a 3-2 triumph over Ukraine in Ljubljana. 32 days later, the Croatian War of Independence was finally ended, with the signing of the Erdut Agreement and complete victory for Croatia. That triumph was toasted with a fitting 2-1 win in Slovenia to confirm top spot. Whilst Croatians could be upset with UEFA's delayed acceptance of the nation into European football, they could thank them for the nonsensical seeding of the Euro 96 draw. They would be placed into an unseeded pool of 12 teams, whilst the holders Denmark and hosts England would be joined by the best performing European nations, allegedly, in Germany and Spain. In an expanded championships featuring teams like Bulgaria, Romania, Russia, Scotland and Switzerland as well as Turkey, there was a great chance that Croatia could be given a favourable draw. Being paired off with the weakest seeded team in Denmark as well as Portugal and Turkey, it was going to be tough, but it was comfortably the softest of the 4 groups. It began in the City Ground, where the Trent would be flooded with Turkish supporters. Whether it was that fact or the small matter of Croatia playing in their first ever tournament game, they began the competition nervously. Prosinecki and Boban were largely ineffective, and the latter was hauled off before the hour mark, despite being named captain. Neither Boksic or Suker did much, the former suffering a clash of heads. However, Turkey were in a similar boat. They hadn't played tournament football since 1954, but their 20,000 supporters inside the City Ground had little to cheer for in Nottingham. Turkey were poor in front of goal and could only blame themselves for Croatia's late winner. In a feel-good story, it was Goran Vlahovic coming off the bench to find a late winner on 86 minutes. He had no right to be alive after suffering from a blood clot less than a year prior to finding the net, his country's first tournament goal. Vlahovic could largely give thanks to the opposing Alpay, who refused to bring him down and take a red card for his team. Whilst UEFA awarded him with a Fair Play award, Turkey fans called him a traitor. 2 days previous, Denmark and Portugal shared the spoils whilst Turkey fell to another defeat in Nottingham, thanks to UEFA's new tiebreaker rules preferring the head-to-head record as opposed to goal difference. A win for Croatia would not only send them top of the group, but confirm their spot in the quarter-finals with a game to spare. They moved north to Hillsborough to meet the holders Denmark, which had been earmarked as the most crucial of the group games. Portugal were expected to top the group with Turkey bottom, whilst Croatia and Denmark favoured for a shootout for the all-important second place in Group D. Thankfully, both Boban and Prosinecki improved from the first match, and the breakthrough should have come via a swashbuckling run from Aljosa Asanovic that would make Mickey van der Ven blush. The referee instead opted to award a goal kick, only for a carbon copy run on the other side, this time via Mario Stanic, to win a penalty, which was less of a penalty than the first shout. Davor Suker naturally coldly converted before Zvonimir Boban confirmed the win on the back post with 9 minutes to play. Croatia would qualify for the knockout stages, but they had one final flourish. Despite losing by 2 and effectively out of the game, Peter Schmeichel elected to go up for a corner and got caught short. He just about set himself in the box, and then Davor Suker impudently chipped him. Karol Poborski, eat your heart out, even though that hadn't happened yet, as Croatia confirmed a 3-0 win. It remains Croatia's biggest European Championship victory and would be the country's biggest tournament triumph until 2014. On the final day of the group stages, Croatia needed just the point, albeit against Portugal, to qualify as group winners. Paired off with the group of death featuring Germany, Italy and Czech Republic for the quarter-final, it almost didn't matter where Croatia landed. Miroslav Blažević mirrored this viewpoint, resting 7 players before publicly announcing a preference for Germany since they played, quote, proper football. Portugal ran in 2 goals before Blažević could turn to his bench to bring on Suker, Asanovic and Boban at half-time. The match over, there was little point in putting up any further fight as Portugal ran in a third. Blažević had his wish. Croatia would play Germany in the quarter-final, and not for the last time. Proper football Croatia received at Old Trafford, and their response was to target Jurgen Klinsmann. Yet it was a needless batting away of the ball by Nikola Jurkan in the penalty area that provided Germany's early solace. Klinsmann converted the penalty but continued to be kicked out of the game, and he would be substituted before the half's end. For as great as Matthias Sammer had been throughout the tournament, he was fortunate not to be sent off on 5 minutes for halting a Croatian counter-attack, and it was his sloppiness that led to Davor Suker's equaliser on 51 minutes. Any momentum Croatia had through their early second-half goal was murdered by Igor Stimac 5 minutes later when the defender tried to detach Mehmet Scholz's ankle from his foot. Down to 10 men, it would naturally be Matthias Sammer who snapped out of his poor game with the winner 3 minutes later. Removed of their resolve, the experience of Germany told as they killed off the game. Croatia's tournament was over, admirably if a little clumsily, bowing out at the quarter-finals. The question now was, could they go again, but this time on the world stage? But before we answer that, I need to tell you about how I watch every single Premier League match completely legally, which means it's VPN time! A VPN hides your IP address, which lets you safeguard your internet connection. So, the absolute opposite of what the Manchester United defence would do. Am I right? No? Okay. And for those who haven't skipped this YouTube advert because you bloody love a bargain, here's why you should choose private internet access, today's video sponsor. 1. They're offering you an insane 83% VPN discounts and 4, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4 months completely free. See it like Manchester City buying Citigroup players for a knockdown price. 2. You can protect an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. Chelsea's transfer strategy for 1. You want 783 devices protected? Just buy them all up and protect them. 3. You can access region-restricted content from all over the world 365 days a year. Good news for Spurs fans whose passports are usually back in that cupboard by December. That is private internet access. Links to the discount in the description. Croatia were officially competing for a place at the World Cup, and they were handed a kind 5-team group that featured Greece, Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as Slovenia, with the seeded team being the familiar Denmark. If Croatia could repeat their heroics from England in the summer of '96 and keep their cool against the other teams, they would be in the World Cup. Ultimately, it was a campaign of unforeseen blips at home, salvaging a point at home to Greece in November '96, chucking in multiple 2-goal leads against Slovenia 5 months later in a chaotic 3-3 in Split. That came a few days after their reunion with Denmark, which almost ended in victory, but for Brian Laudrup's late leveller. Croatia completed the 96-97 season with a difficult 1-0 win in Thessaloniki, and after hammering Bosnia 4-1, they were proving to be good travellers but vastly underachieving back at home. A late Zvonimir Boban winner at home to that same Bosnia and Herzegovina team perhaps bucked that trend, leaving Croatia with a chance to top the group going into their final match. Arguably their hardest matches were yet to come, away in Copenhagen and in Ljubljana. Croatia capitulated, shipping 3 goals in the first 40 minutes against the Danes. It left them in an unenviable position of being unable to qualify automatically, and now they needed favours from Athens. Denmark were thankfully just 3 points ahead of Greece, and goal difference stated that they needed to get a point to confirm qualification. Meanwhile, Croatia trailed Greece by a point and poorer goal difference, which left them needing to go to Slovenia and win, but also hoping that Denmark might get that point they needed. Thankfully, there was only static coming from Athens, inferring the 0-0 draw. That, when coupled with Croatia's heroic 3-1 win in Ljubljana, was a perfect concoction to gift Croatia a spot in the playoffs against Ukraine. They won comfortably in Zagreb via the goals from Slavan Bilic and Goran Vlahovic, but the tie was far from over. This much proven when Andrei Shevchenko took just 5 minutes to score in front of 77,000 of his compatriots in Kyiv. This was the epitome of the cliché, next goal is vital. If Ukraine scored it, we would be going to extra time, but if Croatia scored it, Ukraine would need 3 in response. Who do you think scored it, since we're talking about Croatia at the 1998 World Cup? Of course it was them, via Alan Boksic. Ukraine hadn't given up at that point, but did when Vitaly Kozovsky was denied a legal goal for offside. 3-1 aggregate winners, Croatia were going to the World Cup. As one of 4 debutants for the tournament, Croatia received some almighty luck when they were paired off with 2 fellow debutants in Jamaica and Japan. Being handed the seed of Argentina didn't seem like a good thing, but when you take into account that it inextricably meant that Croatia would avoid the heavier hitters of Chile, Colombia and Paraguay from Pot 3, the nation could accept they'd got a decent draw once again. That luck unfortunately didn't extend to the front line. Alan Boksic was ruled out of the tournament through injury, and Davor Suker was in a rut, scoring just 5 goals all season for Real Madrid. Croatia were one of the last teams to start their tournament. Whilst Yugoslavia had stuttered through their first game against Iran hours previous, Croatia burst into life against Jamaica in Lens. Robert Prozinski had a hand in the first before scoring the second to become the first player to score goals for 2 different teams at World Cups. Own goals excluded, you nutter. Davor Suker finished the game off, confirming a 3-1 win with 5 days to prepare for another debutant in Nantes. A win would confirm a spot in the knockouts a round early yet again. If Croatia blew Jamaica away, they were stifled in their next game against more difficult opponents in Japan, but against more vastly difficult conditions in the midday Breton sun. Yet it remains a cliched mark of a good team, win when you're not doing well, and Davor Suker's 77th minute goal confirmed that. After 5 goals for Real in 27 matches all season, the forward had hit 2 in 2. Blažević wasn't about to throw away the third match like he might have done with his multiple changes in 1996. Here there were just 2, in came Zvonimir Boban and Silvio Maric. Goal difference stated that Croatia needed to win to top the group, but the match was played in a tame manner, as Argentina changed half their outfield and were still capable of claiming the 1-0 victory. Both attempted to avoid suspensions by playing a light game, but because the referee was feeling a little bit anal, Zvonimir Soldo would miss the last 16 match thanks to a yellow card. Not that the result mattered much either way. The possible opponents of Romania or England were all but equals, and Croatia had maintained their momentum. Meeting them in the last 16 were 11 dorks with bleached blonde hair who looked like they had pitched up in Bordeaux, as a stag do. Psychologically, Zvonimir Boban summed it up when he said, "If you do this for just passing around, it told me they weren't expecting anything more, that they were already celebrating." And so it played out. Romania were inferior in every department, were exactly the kind of passive team that Boban predicted. Bizarre really, when this was a team that had only been eliminated from the World Cup in the 90s on penalties at the last 16 faced to Ireland and the quarter-final stage to Sweden. And it was a penalty that took them out of France 98, won after the softest of collisions between Georgi Popescu and Asanovic. Davor Suker, who else, scored his third goal in 4 games after a retake. After 11 minutes of the second half, the match was effectively won when Georgi Hagi was adamant he wanted to be sent off, and was. Croatia should have won by more, but there was a thrashing coming down the tracks for one team. Hello Germany in the quarter-finals, again. Somehow, champions in 1996 and even more diminished from that trophy 2 years prior, Blažević knew he was going to beat Germany this time. I convinced my players we were the best team in the world, and they accepted it. We were packed with confidence. We destroyed the German machine 3-0 in the quarter-final, and we showed them how Croatians play football. Even though watering their legs with holy water from Lourdes had become a tradition in the Croatian camp, it was obvious they didn't need God's help. A drab first half exploded into life when Christian Vorns was sent off, and Germany's newfound vulnerability was punished by a late first half Robert Jani goal. Goran Vlahovic and, of course, Davor Suker wrapped up the game late on in a 3-0 whitewash. Whilst Bertie Votes moaned like a little bitch about the red card that was, Croatians could point to the one that wasn't, Oliver Bierhoff escaping punishment for a brazen elbow on Zvonimir Soldo. Either way, Croatia were far and away the better team and dished out Germany's worst World Cup defeat since 1954. We laughed before like it was a joke. Now we are not laughing. We are not saying we are the best, but we deserve to be in the last 4. The words of Slavan Bilic ahead of a trip to the Stade de France to meet the hosts in the semi-final. The winner would meet the Brazil of Ronaldo, Rivaldo and Roberto Carlos. The loser would play for bronze against the Netherlands of Bergkamp, Overmars and Davids. Much like the prior round, the first half was drab, only with no opposition red card and no Croatian sucker punch goal. Within 2 minutes of the second half, we had 2 strikes. Davor Suker scored his 5th goal, equaling his entire tally for the previous season, before Lilian Thuram netted his first international goal shortly after. The ball was gifted to him by Zvonimir Boban, who fought an illness to play, but by the 65th minute, he could hardly go on any further. 5 minutes later, Croatia surrendered the lead when Lilian Thuram scored his 2nd international goal. A 23-minute aberration, he would not score in another one of his 141 matches for Le Bleu. Croatia attempted to carve out a route back into the game when Slavan Bilic went down like he had been shot after a flimsy Laurent Blanc palm to the chest. The Frenchman got a red card for his troubles, was suspended for the final, but ultimately Croatia couldn't capitalise. They'd become the 5th straight European team to win bronze, a record that has continued from 1982 to this very day. Davor Suker grabbed his goal, the winner, and for the Golden Boot no less. It could scarcely have gone better for Croatia outside of pumping both France and Brazil. The foundations for success were perfect, the springboard for the 21st century, but for a country as small as Croatia in a region so hotly contested as Europe, it wasn't always that easy. The Croatia of 1996 and 1998 was a country and a football team still inventing itself and realising what they truly were. This was a Croatian public who still had the deep scars that gaining their independence gave them. A Croatian team that gained that extra slice of momentum whenever their national anthem was played. If 1996 was a ride of nationalism, 1998 was Croatia in their true potential, simply being another footballing nation at the forefront of the game. Gone was the rest of the Republic's finest players, but also gone was the infighting that helped put an end to that particular republic. Croatian was a small, tight-knit team, almost a club itself, all pulling towards the same thing, and with players of a certain quality, the overachievement was possible. After reaching a quarter-final and a semi-final, Croatia wouldn't play another knockout game for another decade. But when a generation of player comes along, Croatia has to squeeze every last drop out of it. The class of Modric, Perisic, Rakitic, Lovren and Mandzukic eclipsed even the great inaugural generation of Suker, Prozinski and Boban by reaching their first ever World Cup final in 2018. Speaking of nations with small populations who overachieve, click on this video about Wales, except it's about the time before they got good.